Story 1. In ninth grade, we completed a mandatory internship. I did mine as a nurse, and the hospital placed me in the cancer ward. One of the patients had a brain tumor that destroyed most of his brain and half of his face. You could literally see inside his head, and the smell was very strong. He was still walking around, very confused but also polite. I felt very sorry for him. The nurses found him so distressing that they sent me every morning to take his vital signs. When I told my teacher, she reported it to several people and then informed the school never to send any interns to that hospital again. I was just 13, and his face remains one of the clearest memories I have from that time. I had nightmares for months about my own face decaying. Story 2. I was driving with my married uncle, and he had his phone attached to one of those car phone holders. A message popped up, a picture of large black birds, not his wife, but a saved contact. I literally just turned my head, and we never spoke about it. I was about 12 years old. Story 3. I worked in information technology for many years. When employees bring you their non-functioning laptop to fix, do not look through their folders. It is very unprofessional. Additionally, you have to see them every day after that. Hence my username. Story 4. Sawing into the breastbone at the beginning of an autopsy. This was in the late afternoon on public television in the late 1980s. I turned off the television. Story 5. Working at United Van Lines, returning to our facility from a house we just emptied the belongings into for the client. An accident happened 2 cars away. I saw the woman's brain matter go about 50 feet down the road along with her crumpled vehicle. Plays back in my mind constantly. Anything somewhat resembling brain matter makes me feel very nauseous. Story 6. There was a cat lying behind a car wheel, and its poor head got squished. I held him as he spasmed and passed. Thankfully, it was quick, but it broke my heart. For a while, his face would come into my mind. Thankfully, I do not see it often anymore, but sometimes it randomly flashes in my mind. About 4 years ago, I woke up to find my boyfriend had died overnight. The same thing happens. His cold, dead eyes sometimes pass through my mind, although thankfully not as often as they used to. Story 7. Driving home from school, I came across an accident on the highway. I will never forget seeing the poor man's mutilated body just lying there. No police were on the scene yet. I am 22 years old. This was a couple of months ago. Story 8. A lovely video of my cat's recent surgery where they showed me the moment they sliced open a mass and drained it like a medical horror movie special. I could have happily lived my entire life without witnessing that. Thank you for the transparency, but I did not need to see my pet's insides in high definition. That image now lives rent-free in my brain and haunts my dreams like it is paying full mortgage. Story 9. The act of speaking in tongues. It was at a church when I was younger. The ridiculous manners of the people there and the absurd sounds they made were just so ignorant. I should thank them though, as that, among other things, started me on my journey of skepticism. Story 10. A good friend took her own life when we were in our late 20s. It unfortunately took quite a while for someone to find her body. Her mother decided to have an open casket at her funeral. I had night terrors for months about her swollen, mottled face. Story 11. A girl on a dating app once asked me if I wanted to see a dirty video of her. I said sure, thinking it would be something sexy with her in it. Nope. Read at your own risk. It was a video she recorded of her French bulldog, which I presume was hers, having sex with her from behind. I immediately stopped all contact with her. It has been since 2020, and I will never get those 5 seconds out of my head. Story 12. Years ago, my brother-in-law shared a video on Facebook of a man climbing on some equipment very high up. He fell and hit his head on a railing. In his caption, he was laughing. I unfriended my brother-in-law at that moment. I felt sick. While our relationship is cordial, I have never been able to look at him the same way, no matter how many years have passed. How can anyone share such a video, let alone find it funny? Story 13. I saw a man get killed by a booby trap I set for him. He seemed to disappear in a large cloud of dust and blood. The red dust is what I actually saw as it blended with the cloud. I never saw the remains, but I understood there was enough left to confirm it was an adult male and very likely the intended target. I was a soldier and he was a terrorist. We had regular mortar and rocket attacks from an area, but the attacks always happened on a timer. We would retaliate with artillery but failed to kill any enemies. We set and concealed many mines for when the enemies returned. One of the traps I set succeeded. We had a good month or two without attacks from that area again. I understood more mines had gone off in that area too, but I was not on duty to witness them. War is hell. I would not recommend it. Story 14. Jesus Christ. Many of you have seen some horrible things, and I am sorry for your experiences. So many car accidents. What comes to mind is a homeless man I met 4 years ago when I was going through a difficult relapse. He had an open, infected abscess on his left arm, and his veins were so damaged that he was injecting methamphetamine and fentanyl directly into his body wherever he could. He weighed about 90 pounds and looked like a walking skeleton covered in open sores that he was constantly trying to pick imaginary worms out of. Story 15. One Saturday afternoon on our honeymoon, we were driving in the lakes region of Italy. A poor grandfather on a motor scooter collided head-on with a van just before we reached that section of the road. The van had a giant V-shaped dent in the front. I do not want to describe what the poor grandfather looked like. Story 16. A person in the air, looking so graceful and free. They had rear-ended a pickup truck and went through their windshield. I do not actually remember seeing them land and roll about 100 feet. It is like my mind will not let me. Story 17. When I was younger, a 17-year-old had crashed his car, flew out of the windshield, and went 100 feet in the air. His body was found in the trees. I never saw the body, but his car was towed to our local gas station. I remember going to school and seeing the car with a bloody, jagged oval broken out of the windshield when he was ejected. It just lives rent-free in my head. Story 18. Flew to India. In a taxi about 300 meters from the airport, there was a man who had crashed his motorbike. The whole bike was in flames with his body still burning while sitting on the seat, but the bike was on the ground. Traffic was moving slowly because everyone was standing in the street taking pictures of him. Also, in Morocco, a street dog was eating another dog that had been hit by a car. We made eye contact, and I swear I saw shame in him. He did not want to be eating his dog friend, but I guess that is the life of a stray dog in Africa. Story 19. I had to put a .22 bullet in my dog's head to end her life. My girlfriend's father did it, and I held her down. Looking back, it was like something from Old Yeller. She was in a seizure that lasted for almost an hour, maybe longer. Story 20. The whole family came together to provide home hospice care for my father. He died late one night during my shift. I looked up from my book to check on him, and he was gone. It was about as merciful a death as one could have from something as cruel as stage 4 stomach cancer. I am grateful he was not in pain, but he looked scared in the end. Story 21. I witnessed a fatal motorcycle accident. He lost control, hit the curb, and went flying. He died on impact. I was the first person at the scene. I am firmly against motorcycles at this point. It was not just this one incident, but it sealed my opinion. Story 22. What a man looks like after he has been injured by an improvised explosive device. He was close enough that multiple fragments entered his body, and his leg was hanging on by a piece of skin. This occurred in Iraq, and I work in the medical field for the army. I wish I were not going back. Story 23. The eyes of a 9-month-old as I was performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation on him because his mother left him unsupervised in a running bath. Story 24. The results of someone thinking a train was going to stop at the station. Spoiler. The train was an express train and it did not stop. Story 25. When I was a young teenager, I knew where my dad would hide his special magazines. I kept checking them out. One month, while going through the pages, there was a 4-page article full of pictures of my mom, dad, and a stranger together. I never again took the risk of looking at such magazines. Story 26. I drove past a serious trucking accident and saw a severed arm on the road before it was picked up or covered. This was on Route 20 in Ohio. The smell of burning flesh was one of the most disgusting things I have ever smelled. The truck was engulfed in flames at one point before I arrived. They were slowly letting traffic pass, but I do not know why they did not handle the arm first. It still gives me the chills. Story 27. For years, I just saw those everyday normal coat hooks on my workplace bathroom doors until someone pointed out that they look like a drunk octopus looking for a fight. Story 28. My dad was held at gunpoint by the police whom I called for help during an attempted child trafficking incident. We were in Turkey and could not speak Turkish, but the traffickers could. They lied to the police, who then held my dad at gunpoint. He was wearing a red Jack and Jones t-shirt, which the traffickers had ripped off from the front while he was fighting them to protect us. You know how fabric can crease and fold? I glanced over and all I saw was him being held at gunpoint and a red pool beneath him. I thought it was blood and that he had been shot. I was 11 years old. I still think about it often, and it has made me very scared of guns. Story 29. A person who set themselves on fire, and while attending an autopsy, saw the brain of a man who was beaten to death pour out of his skull like pudding. Story 30. Was out hiking with the Boy Scouts. A child's father had a heart attack in the middle of nowhere. Watched his son trying to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation for about an hour. Story 31. We had a puppy when I was about 7 or 8, and my sister was around 12. I remember we buried him in the backyard behind the clothesline. My sister waited about 2 weeks and then dug him up. She was very excited to see what he looked like. I was horrified. I remember her digging through the tiny rotting body with her bare fingers. The look on her face was excited, entranced. I grew up in a rural area, so seeing dead animals was not unusual. But what she was doing with that expression is something that will stay with me forever. Story 32. I cannot say exactly what happened, but a few years ago, I became curious about the dark web, and let's just say I took a wrong turn while I was there. Story 33. When my father had a seizure, it was very frightening not being able to help him and waiting until it was over. I still have nightmares about it. Story 34. Not really relevant to new films, but ever since it was pointed out in Fight Club, if a film has real cue marks, known as cigarette burns in the film, I notice every single one. What is really strange to me about this is that in the 1990s and 2000s, I knew several projectionists, and prior to Fight Club, none of them ever pointed the cue marks out to me. So it was a stepping into another universe type of experience for me at the time. Story 35. I am a nurse and used to work in labor and delivery. I had a patient who needed a very urgent cesarean section. Things were not going well, and there was a significant chance the baby would not survive. I will never forget the panic in her eyes when she called out to me and asked me to hold her hand on the way into the operating room. The baby survived and has grown into a beautiful, healthy little boy. That moment will stay with me for life. Story 36. I look at many medical forums and generally do not have an issue with most of the Messier aspects of the human body. It feels different when you see it firsthand on someone you love. My late mother-in-law died from multiple organ failure following advanced cirrhosis after many years of heavy drinking. Our last visit, when they were in the United Kingdom and we were in Australia, was 6 weeks before she died. One night, I got up to use the bathroom, and she saw me coming out and asked if I could help put some dressings on her back because she had accidentally scratched too hard and was bleeding. When the body's filtration systems no longer work and toxins and waste products build up, it often results in itching all over. At that stage, her body was weak, her skin thin and fragile, sagging from her frame. She probably had not scratched that hard, but I remember thinking it looked like a werewolf had mauled her. In the grand scheme, these scratches were minor compared to graphic images I have seen. What made it different was that it was real on someone I cared about, and I knew it was theoretically preventable. We all knew she was an alcoholic, but I later realized that most others had resigned themselves to her dying years ago, while I was still naive enough to hope the imminent mortality would be a wake-up call. While putting dressings on the bloody scratches, I fully understood she really was going to die from this, and soon. That image is forever stuck in my mind. Not the most graphic, but real, personal, and very sad. Story 37. My daughter had open heart surgery a couple of weeks after she was born. She was tiny, and her body was too swollen for them to close her chest. She spent a couple of days with an open chest covered in plastic. My wife couldn't handle it, so I was alone in the hospital with her. I spent hours looking down on her, sedated and able to see into her open chest. Even now, I feel numb thinking about it. I'll never forget what it looked like. And I think I should be horrified or sad or angry, but it all just feels kind of empty. Story 38. I was backpacking in Thailand when I accidentally walked into a spa that turned out to be not the massage kind. The decor was normal until I noticed the neon sign flickering, "Happy Ending Guaranteed." Cue internal panic. I tried to play it cool by asking for a foot massage, but the therapist kept winking as if we were in on some secret. I left faster than my dignity did. Many tourists report similar misunderstandings due to different cultural interpretations of relaxation services. Has anyone else had awkward translation fails abroad? Story 39. When I was 14 years old, I was having fun on Omegle and was really into horror stories. Anyway, I got paired with someone with a black screen who just asked, "Do you want to see something?" I mistakenly thought he meant horror stories. Instead, I saw disturbing content and was traumatized for life. Story 40. Apple promotes the USB-C connector as an innovation they introduced to their devices, not as a requirement imposed by the European Union. Story 41. In March of this year, I was caring for a now-deceased family member. He had been in a motorcycle accident about 40 years ago and was left a paraplegic. Over the years, most of his legs were amputated, which left a scab on the remaining part that would not heal. He also had many wounds on his lower back and buttocks, some going through to the other side of his body. Honestly, I was not sure everything was attached internally. If we lifted him out of bed, someone would have had to hold the bottom or something would fall out. Story 42. A man driving a pickup truck was on his phone and ran into the back of a dump truck. How do I know he was on his phone? Because his arm was hanging outside the driver's window, clutching a phone, while the rest of him was smashed into the dashboard and windshield. That vision will not go away. One more. As a kid, my dad drove an ambulance and would get calls while my mom was working and watching me, so he had to take me along. One call was for a man who had been run over by a train. I was curious about what my dad was looking for along the tracks, so I hopped out. Half the body, the top half, had been dragged about 100 feet. We found it. That is something I can never forget. Story 43. Downloaded a Deftones music video from a random torrent site only to see a man in the forest with a boot on his face and then a knife through his throat. There was a lot of gargling. I had spent hours on dial-up waiting for that My Own Summer video. It was the first surprise gore I had ever encountered at that point. I think I was 12 or 13. Also, I remember the faces of the people in the car watching as my car flipped in the air into a ditch. It was only a second or two, but it felt like time slowed. I looked out my window to see two horrified faces. Story 44. Walking past a long line of very smelly roped-off portable toilets at a large outdoor concert. The wind blew open one of the doors, revealing a perfectly conical pile of waste rising about 20 inches above the toilet seat. It must have been deposited by someone with exceptional skill, but it still makes me gag whenever I think about it. Story 45. A collection of video thumbnails on a friend's computer. Yes, I reported them to the police. Yes, they were arrested. No, I do not speak to them anymore. Story 46. I performed forensic data recovery on hard drives for a local law enforcement agency. The material I encountered was extremely disturbing. I can no longer do this type of work to avoid exposure to harmful content. Story 47. I was working on a film shoot filming a promotional video for a hospital. They had us store our equipment in a decontamination room near the filming area. Later, a red helicopter arrived carrying a young boy who had been shot in the head. We were told not to move. It was all hands on deck. He died, and then we were told we could retrieve our equipment. During the cleanup, they had placed the soiled equipment used to transport the boy from the helicopter to the hospital in the same room as our belongings. I walked in and saw a wooden stretcher leaning against the wall with a lot of the boy's brain matter on it. It was shocking and took me a while to get over it. Story 48. When I was 8 years old, I saw the next-door neighbor have a stroke just outside our house. I just stood there, frozen. My older twin brother, on the other hand, immediately ran outside to help him and told me to get mom and call emergency services. It was the sagging left cheek and the inability of our neighbor to hold himself up that sticks with me. What bothered me the most was how I just stood frozen. Not scared, just unable to do anything upon seeing our neighbor collapse from a stroke. The neighbor lived but sadly passed away a few months later from heart complications. He was 89. This was around the summer of 2006. Story 49. My mother's boyfriend died from a heart attack while I was at home when I was 11 years old. It has been about 40 years, and I still remember the paramedics taking him away on a stretcher. Story 50. I have seen inside the neck of a young man who cut himself open and hung himself to die. I do not see it every night anymore, but it still haunts my nightmares, and the smell of his blood hits me occasionally. He was completely determined to die, and for a long time I blamed myself, thinking I could have done more to save him. Story 51. Back in high school, I was working on a project that involved making a collage. I was browsing the internet and saving a bunch of pictures to use. When I started printing them out, I stumbled upon pictures of my father's private parts. Keep in mind, this was on the family computer that we all used. Story 52. I was driving a ways behind a motorcyclist who wrecked over a hill. I came up over the hill after and saw him there, bloodied on the ground. His helmet was gone, and blood was covering his face. Half of his riding jacket was also gone, revealing road rash so bad I could see the nerve fibers in his shoulder. One leg was at an unnatural angle, and he was a good 30 yards from his bike. I ran up to him, and the look on his face and the way we locked eyes was the truly traumatizing part. I have seen people in their last moments, and his face was like nothing I have ever seen. It seemed to say, "Please do not let me die." Thankfully, I grew up near the accident and knew the city fire marshal a couple blocks away. I have never run so fast in my life. I never really found out what happened, but I was told he lived. I work in healthcare, and the other things I cannot forget are mostly sounds, those I will not go into. Story 53. Nurse at patient's bedside pulls bandage off groin wound. Blood sprays up like a garden hose. Nurse quickly moves out of the path as blood arches across the room an inch in front of her eyes. She smiles and says, "I have seen that happen before." Story 54. A video of a fire I refuse to name to anyone still haunts me. To say what it is would be immoral, as it could cause harm to anyone who might be curious and look it up. Story 55. The resort where I worked had a restaurant. I was called for a mystery issue in the bathroom. I opened the door and saw that the room was half painted with feces. A trail from the bathroom to a table was found. I made a quick call to housekeeping, then went outside and got sick. Story 56. Performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation on a client I found unresponsive once. It was a lost cause. He had probably been deceased for too long for it to have made any difference. In the moment, you want to do everything possible. More than the sight of seeing him on the floor from the door, I will never forget the sound of fluid in his lungs while I was doing chest compressions. Story 57. I was a contractor in Iraq back in 2006. I was walking down the flight line to the C-130 we were going to take to the next forward operating base when, across the tarmac, I saw a couple of soldiers in uniform hit by an insurgent mortar rocket. It was a 1-in-a-million shot. I do not think the soldiers survived. Story 58. The neighbor's dog died on the street, and they let their other dog eat it over several days. They even placed a water bowl by the street. Story 59. First on the scene of a car accident. One car overturned with a family crawling out of the windows. No serious injuries. The other car was wrapped around a telephone pole. I will never forget the amount of blood in the wreckage and the smell of iron mixed with exhaust. A young driver fell asleep at the wheel. Story 60. A basking shark is a gentle giant of the ocean, and there are no reports of anyone ever being attacked or even inadvertently hurt by one. But when one swims by 3 feet away, It is something you never forget. Story 61. Watching my grandfather actively die. Oh, and the eyes of a marlin before it was killed. Felt human. Last time I went fishing. Story 62. Nothing can be unseen. Therefore, everything is something that cannot be unseen, regardless of how many times one has seen it. Story 63. Back in 2009, I saw a man get hit by a regional rail train slowing down for a stop outside Philadelphia. The train was still going very fast. He was thrown about 30 feet, got up, and tried to walk to the nearby convenience store. It looked like he was either trying to commit suicide or was very intoxicated. Story 64. A man in a grocery store is licking a stick of butter like it is a popsicle. Was it a dare or passion? I will never know. Story 65. Cartel videos. I closed my old Reddit account, and it took 6 months for those images to stop haunting me. Story 66. My husband thought the site du Vin Museum in Bordeaux looks like a decapitated rubber duck instead of the wine decanter it is meant to represent. I cannot unsee it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.